Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this. My name is Anuj Kumar, and I'm the industry strategy lead for UK SAP, focused predominantly on financial services. Now, we have in the past with Financial Services Club already had a successful session where we talked about AI in financial services and what does that mean for all of us. This is the follow up to that. Now, just to get things going, let's be clear that AI is no more a topic limited to technology providers or, for that matter, executives in the industry. It is now a common agenda. Everyone is experiencing artificial intelligence in some form or the other. There are recommendations coming for movies, there are recommendations coming for the next grocery you can purchase. And as a consequence, artificial intelligence as a topic has to be understood by one and all. Now, that has become that much more relevant with this growth of ChatGPT, where people are asking questions and almost getting answers that they never thought they would. Therefore, we as SAP have come up with this particular discussion wherein we want to take that idea of artificial intelligence, what does that mean for financial services, to its next stage. From our experience and lessons learned from various conversations with our industry clients, we're recognizing that the debate is now moving to the idea of who is actually accountable for the AI decisions. Who should decide whether artificial intelligence is applicable to a particular part of the bank or not? So, therefore, like I said, moving on from the previous conversation, we now talk about accountability and responsibility. We have already started to get themes wherein the focus of the industry is about education. Do we all know what it is? To ethics, in the sense of what is the inherent bias that artificial intelligence could bring to the table? And then everyone's sort of grappling around how do I execute on it? Let's start getting into that discussion. Let me first introduce three experts who are on this panel. Michael Walsh leads the financial services practice for SAP in the UK. Significant experience in taking technology to the industry and working out what the business problem is and how to make it relevant to industry executives. Mikhail Netterberg, our Global Center of Excellence expert, who engages in a multiple set of industries to really work out how do I make AI relevant to the industry and make it useful and applicable to specific use cases. And then we've got Stuart Grant, a global head of capital markets and asset management, who comes from a data background, and therefore this becomes his sweet subject, wherein he's really looking at how do I make AI simple and relevant for everyday use. That's the panel that we've pulled together. I will facilitate this conversation and we'll pull on the different questions that come to mind. We have almost 50 people coming on this call now. And before we get going, a part of me feels let's get a baseline on what the general perception on challenges are in terms of implementing AI. I'm going to ask the FS Club team to put out a poll question where I'll request everyone to quickly give their view on where do we believe the challenges are. I'll pause for people's responses. Excellent. So we are closing the poll now. What is interesting and unsurprisingly, that there is a common view that learning and education is going to be important. You can see if you add the two, 40% of the people on the call are starting to relate to the idea of we need to know more. Use cases definitely are top of mind, which basically begs the question, where do I apply it? How, where do I go with it? And interestingly, the technology specific questions on data silos and fragmented architecture sort of relatively come lower. If you sort of make an attempt to summarize that, we have to continue this whole journey on understanding what it is and understanding where the business problem is that artificial intelligence skills can solve. Now, if we very quickly just put a very simple definition of artificial intelligence. It is using technology and data to, in some ways, bring to its users the new insights that one could only imagine from human intelligence. But now technology is driving that intelligence and bringing innovative thinking, new insights to its users. So, with that as a very simplistic definition of what artificial intelligence is, let's go straight to the core question. Who is ultimately accountable for AI? If we assume that everyone's discussing it, everyone's talking about it, everyone has an intent to do something with it, who is actually accountable for artificial intelligence in an organization? In this conversation, banks. Where should the buck stop? I'm going to request our panel members to start contributing. Michael, what's your view on who should be accountable in a bank for artificial intelligence?
Thanks, Anuj. I've been speaking to a lot of our customers around this exact topic, and from our perspective, it's the business that should own AI projects, especially if those projects are relevant to their operations. And if you think about it, it's the business that should understand the problems that potentially AI is going to help resolve. Hence, they're in the best place to figure out which use cases should be prioritized. Once those use cases are identified, there's many other considerations after that. There's data governance, there's risk management, and of course there's technical expertise. And at that stage, once the use cases have been identified, they bring in the relevant parts of the organization to help with those other topics. And there's a collaboration then that takes place. What I've seen quite recently in organizations that have a more mature AI strategy, what they also tend to do is they put a central AI leadership in place. We've done an SAP where we have a chief AI officer or an AI center of excellence. And then there starts to be a bit of direction. There starts to be a set of standards that are put in place. And ultimately, it's that then where the book stops.
That's interesting. Stuart, I think you sort of echo that thought on having an AI executive being held accountable. But build on that please.
No, absolutely. I think if you look at the way that AI is developing and maturing, as Michael says, it's tracking very closely to the role of the chief data officer that came into organizations, say, 10 or so years ago. And actually, it's not just analogous to the role of the chief data officer, it's actually very tightly coupled to the CDO role as well, because in order for AI to be successful, then ultimately the data that feeds into any of the AI engines has got to be accurate, it's got to be authenticated, it's got to be confidence inspiring in terms of the result set that comes out the other side. So I completely agree that the role of a chief AI officer is needed, but I think it's quite interesting, right, the way that Michael looked at the the perspective on who owns the problem right now, and it's reflecting what the poll told us as well, right, which is where should the use cases be coming from? And I think the big difference around the AI topic compared to almost any other technology innovation or transformation that's happened in the last 50 or so years is the responsibility truly does lie with the business, because it's about imagination. Organizations over the last 20, 30 plus years have grown up with the business being told that projects would be $100 million or 100 man years because they were too complex because of the limitations of technology. And ultimately, with this AI topic now, we've got a scenario where the technology is almost ahead of our imagination, or at least the boundaries we've put around our imagination. So until the business environments are in a position to be able to ask, what is it that they truly want, the following aspects that Michael talked about won't really be able to fall into place properly.
So that's interesting. So you are sort of reaffirming that the business has to lead the AI discussion, as much as the reality is it is a lot of technology teams that are sort of getting all energized on AI and sort of almost pushing it to the business. Nevertheless, let's come back to that question in a minute. But this chief AI officer is another sort of great discussion point, wherein it's almost like a new control function that both of you seem to be envisioning, wherein, like a typical risk capability, a control capability, the organization needs to know what are the policies, How do they manage ethics? How do they educate the organization? How do you execute? So I can see the role of a chief AI officer. Mikhail, you address this discussion with a number of other industries, which is more than sort of banking. What's your view? I mean, what are the other industries doing in this spirit?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because it's actually affirmed what we just heard from Michael and Stuart. But if I look at the different industries, and I just had a look at the customers I have had meeting with the last 2 months, I would say retail is a little bit ahead of others, but nobody is lagging behind. So I just had kind of like the list. So I have had meetings with agriculture, logistics, manufacturing. Everybody is looking at AI and everybody is afraid lagging behind. But back to who owns it, because it's not really, I don't see any businesses or industries lagging behind, but what I see is that the line of business inside companies, I see that finance, HR, and procurement are leading the AI discussions. Normally, find the finance department that are quite conservative. They are leading the discussions, and then we have a lot of discussions, workshops with the CFOs. So again, back to who owns it. It's the business. It's not the data scientists that we used to have the discussions with. It's actually the business people inside the organizations that are looking at ways to do what they normally do in a more clever way, and to see how AI actually can support the complexity of the business.
That's interesting. It almost sounds like there's a race to AI success. Where do you do it well, and how quickly can you leverage the technology? And I'm sort of not surprised that you called out retail at the start, because clearly it is something that hits the consumer very quickly and then start to sort of see value of AI implementation. Having said that, banking for sure can benefit from that as well, particularly in climates where the economy is in an uncertain situation and interest rates are not really helping. So no doubt, banking will be one area that AI will start to play in, albeit with all its limitations of regulation and ethics. But what is interesting here is in the current climate, it is the IT push. But what I'm hearing from all of you is that it almost needs to be a business pull. So how do we address that, Michael? What does IT do going forward?
So, it's a constant conversation around a bridge being built between business and IT. But in this case, IT has to be the enabler. As I said, the business are the ones that identify the strategic problems that AI can assist with. And we've seen some quick wins around things like customer service or fraud detection recently. But more than that, we need to take it to the next level. The business also need to make sure that the use cases that they've identified are aligned to the bank's strategic objectives, which is key. And then if we take it to the next level, there's also a return on investment consideration that needs to take place. So which one of these use cases that we have identified, and as you can imagine, there'll be quite a few, which one of these is going to provide us with the most measurable value moving forward? So we nearly have a case where there is a business case associated to each use case. And then, as I said before, it's at that stage, once that work has been done and the use cases have been identified, we then see the business collaborating with IT, and together then they start to develop and implement AI solutions. But those AI solutions need to be tailored to meet the specific needs of the business.
Oh, see, that's interesting. You continue on the thought of the business has to lead and IT as the enabler. Mikhail, what do you think from another industry's perspective, that the business has to get on the driver's seat and need to get on it quickly where they demand AI implementations?
No, I totally agree. Business is in the leader. Can say that they are taking the lead right now, and IT have to step up also, because business in the whole cloud paradigm, suddenly cloud also have other opportunities than the local IT as well. So in my head, IT have to take a look at their current organization, they need to think of the business as their customers. They need to build up the organization so they can advise. I think just on the questions we had in the beginning. So support the business to identify the use cases, educate the leadership, understanding what AI can do, what AI can't do, and so on. So and it's a golden opportunity for IT, but if they do not step up right now, they will miss the train because
See,
there
that's
are other opportunities.
you are almost recalibrating the expectations of an IT function from just a delivery capability in the back end to start taking a more proactive coaching role where they go ahead and go out and tell the business what does AI mean. Even though the reality is that the operating models, particularly for banks, are terribly complex. They're operating in data silos. Each part of the bank has their own sort of data strategy and their strategy to go on the cloud. So the operating model does drive a certain kind of challenges. Now, Stuart, you definitely have a view on this. How do you um, look at data and the ability for an organization to pull through AI capabilities and drive new insights? What are the operating model challenges and issues that an organization needs to look at?
All right, so if we look at the thread of the discussion so far, right, going from the role of the chief AI officer and the role of technology and those aspects in this, then there's a few trends that we can kind of pick up on. So the first thing is I think the role of the chief AI officer actually comes out of the technology organization, and I'll come back to that, the reason for that in a minute. But the other aspect is Mikhail mentioned before about the leaders within an organization being finance, HR, procurement, for example, in terms of leveraging AI capabilities. Yeah, I've spent the last 25 years working in the capital markets and asset and wealth management space, and technology is ultimately the linchpin as to the reason why for all of this. In any trading organization, pretty much the same goes for a bank or an insurance organization as well. The front office always gets the tools that they need because they're the drivers of the business, right? So a trader always knows what its position is because they've had technology thrown at them and the ability to be able to look at what's happening with the market. That hasn't always been the case with the back office environments. What AI is ultimately doing is democratizing access to information and to the data that an organization holds and helping shrink an organization in the same way that commercial flight shrank the globe. AI is going to help to shrink the organization, the space between the front office and the back office. Now, the reason why I talk about the fact that the chief AI officer role should probably come out of technology, and this is again analogous with the chief data officer aspect, when the CDO role came along, the first priority was evangelism, being able to educate the organization. And AI is very much a technology-driven innovation and change, and so technology is best placed to support that evangelism. But ultimately, as things progress, the reason why business is so important in all of this is because ultimately they'll be driving the use cases, and technology in an AI-driven world is not the same as it was 10, 20 years ago. 10, 20 years ago, we relied on developers to bring the capability to the business because we had to code systems to be able to do things. Now, technology is providing business users with drag and drop access to sophisticated tools, and AI is just going to accelerate that. So if we look at the path of data within an organization, from the process of ingesting that data or creating that data within a system to then moving it through the value chain of the organization from front office to middle office to back office. In the past, organizations have selected best of breed applications or built their own applications to be best of breed. And so we've got a financial services industry of plumbing that moves data from point to point. What AI is ultimately going to do is to become the bridge to those silos, and that's going to have a dramatic effect on the operating models. There's absolutely no reason why at some point in the near future, AI is going to enable a finance operations analyst or whoever to be able to ask what trading positions are being executed in the front office right now that might impact my end of day capital position. Doing that today is highly complex because of the operating model challenges that you mentioned before. But I think AI starts to become the facilitator that unlocks all of that. The challenge then is, how does an organization adapt its operating model to enable users to be able to, go across the enterprise and to be able to draw on information in an auditable and controlled way without breaking what they shouldn't be.
See, that's a great build. I mean, I'm sort of really picking on the data point here, because if you look at traditional financial services organizations, data typically is owned by either the business lines, so retail, wealth, capital markets, etc., or the functions of the organization. So it sounds like we are moving towards a time where data owners need to let go of their data control to make it an organizational wide ownership of data and not limited to either the business lines or the functions. So that's really interesting. So it's an organizational data agenda, not a functional data agenda. Mikkel, build on that, please. What does this mean in terms of making it happen? Plus, also just give us a view on generative AI, actually, Mikkel, because that is the new aspect that is now starting to really come into organizational discussions.
Yeah, I think if I start with Gen AI, it has flipped it completely upside down. So in the past, it was, how shall I put it? We had the data science departments working on the structured data, creating specialized AI cases. Now it's upside down. We have the Gen AI capabilities of these large language models that can more or less, of course, based on the right question and on the right data, we can say unstructured data can answer questions better than we humans can do, including the experts. And that is the huge transformation coming right now, and we just got started on this journey. And I also see cases, and this is the amazing part, as I say, I also see, we talk about the organization. I see a future where the need for data scientists can say becoming less and less, because you can actually, if you have your structured data, if that is described, what we call metadata, good enough, then these large language models can do what we did in the past, where we trained special models as well. So I see it, and so having access to data is finally, you can say, making the promise come through about the gold mine. When you have this between the end users, the business users that are not necessarily IT specialists, and then the data, because they can use the large language models to get answer to more or less all the questions they have.
Very interesting, Mikkel. Data gold mine, definitely an expression that one has to sort of recognize. And in real terms, I think you reiterate the point on move from organizational data to move to organizational data from functional silos. Just a quick one before we sort of move ahead.
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt.
Yeah,
I want to pick up on a point that Mikkel just mentioned there when he mentioned metadata, because I think this is actually a really crucial point, right? So metadata is effectively the descriptive information that lets a business user or a user know what the data they're looking at means. It's the ultimately the context. And I have a market data background, as many people in London do, having gone through the Reuters related aspect. And one of the biggest data sets that we always used to see missing from any financial services organization was metadata, that descriptive information. And that exists particularly within larger larger multinational organizations, but also organizations with longer heritage. If you look at the way that startups and fintechs are building their businesses now, they've got cloud first mindsets. They don't want the kind of the development overheads that other organizations and institutions have had. And so naturally, topics like metadata don't really mean anything to them because it's built into the solutions that they're utilizing. So I think one of the critical things here, and the reason again why the business is such an important factor in the success of AI, is they're the ones who can truly describe the data. Right? So the business has to own the data element. And as you say, Anuj, it has to break out of the functional silos. And the business ultimately needs a way of being able to facilitate and support this contextual and continual flow of information that goes across the firm.
See, bang on. I mean, I think add to that this whole idea that business can almost develop their own answers. Technology is advancing in such a way that you're no more bound by the capabilities or the functional readiness at the back end of the IT function. Now the business owners can go out and almost identify the use case and find the answer using AI and technology. The only thing I was going to call out was there is a question stroke comment box. So if there's, I can see a couple coming in, but if there's any other thought that comes in, do feed in. We'll sort of pick those and have a conversation on those. But let's sort of move
Anush,
on.
can I just have
Yeah,
one
please.
comment, and it's based on a real customer case I'm working on right now, where we have taken structured HR data and creating, can say, an LLM solution. What is the amazing part is that business users suddenly begin to ask questions to the data set nobody thought of when we initiated the use case. So as I say, this can say suddenly having the business users access to this data also kind of brings up new use cases that nobody thought of when we did the use case. And that is the magic, which is Gen AI or the large language models, is that you can say the boundaries that you defined when you initiated the use case doesn't exist.
Mm. It's almost
So
being able
the
to
use
ask the questions you didn't know you could ask, and then suddenly you realize
exactly
you can ask.
they come up with new solutions for existing problems that nobody thought of, but using the same structured data. And of course, again, the metadata are so important because that is the grounding that tells the large language models what the data actually means, how it can say how the interpretation should work when the large language models look at.
That's very interesting. Look, I think if we look at the key points that are coming out, number one, the business has to be encouraged to understand what artificial intelligence is and start putting out requests to the IT and the operational function saying, I've got a problem statement. I believe AI can solve it. Could you help me get there? So business has to be encouraged. Second, and I can see comments coming on the chief AI officer as well. Clearly, it's a role that has to now form and become big enough for it to drive and shape the future of large organizations. AI is here to stay. It's no more a topic for techies to discuss. Chief AI officer will be a role that will emerge. Another point that becomes quite clear that IT has to sort of now start playing as a friendly coach to be able to start helping businesses understand what artificial intelligence is. It cannot now just be either a mere provider or a decision maker on what is and what is not possible. The other 2 points that became quite apparent was the operating model question, one being data as a gold mine, and I love that expression there, Mikhail. Data as a gold mine has to now become move from functional ownership to organizational ownership. Unless we see everyone understanding what data we have, no one will be able to ask the questions they almost didn't know they could ask, or for that matter, get insights they never thought they could get. So clearly it has to move. So where do we go next? I mean, how do we get going? This is not a new subtopic. This is not a new subject that everyone's thinking about. We need to start thinking on really the little steps that can get organizations moving. Where do we go on that one? Stuart, just get us going on that. Where do we start?
Sure. So that's, I mean, one of the things that we have the luxury of, for working with an organization like SAP, is we get to see SAP's internal transformation for these things. So if you go back, 10, 20 years and you look at the SAP systems, they were heavily developer focused, a lot of, code-based elements, quite proprietary in nature. Whereas today, what we have is self-service tools. Everything is kind of self-educating. It's focused towards business users. And if you look even at the things like the SAP Discovery Center, where we kind of push these capabilities out to the market, then you get the opportunity to see how technology has changed. So that helps with the education side of things. The other aspect is, I think organizations need to rapidly start thinking about what their operating model is going to look like in even 3 to 5 years' time. Right? So there's going to be some fairly significant, and this is a board level mandate Has to be some fairly significant thought processes around what does that look like. That becomes particularly important when you've got topics like data sovereignty, which are maturing quite rapidly around the globe. So if you're a multinational organization, data sovereignty is probably already on the horizon, but it's going to become even more important as firms go forward. And then if we look at the business and how, the importance that we've placed on the business side of things and how they're driving this topic, the easiest thing for them to do is to start with all the times that they've opened a conversation with, I wish. I wish I could do X, I wish I could do Y. That's exactly what AI is going to facilitate and help organizations to achieve going forwards. And that'll start to kind of bring forward the use cases. I think that those are the kind of key things. You've got to look at the data strategy and how that's going to impact on the operating model. Democratize that. How do you build a blueprint for the data? So how do you understand what data do you have? How do you bring technologies like data cataloging to bear so that you can bring that metadata to the data and start to make it accessible to the large language models? And then, let the business's imagination go wild, right? Let them define all the things that they hoped they'd be able to do.
Yeah, that's interesting, Stuart. It almost sounds like AI is pushing each one of us to move from pure logical thinking to creative thinking.
Absolutely.
The very fact that you've used the word imagine, that almost forces everyone to say, look, there is a technology out there that can go out and do things that you never thought about before. So why don't you just sit down and imagine what all you can think about? Now, Mikkel, I'm going to get your view on a structured approach, but before we do that,
I just wanted to quickly add, sorry. I think the imagine piece is both exciting and daunting for an organization, right? So this is why the key around a structure needs to be implemented quite quickly. I was speaking to someone the other day that was running a center of excellence, and he said the amount of use cases that were coming in was getting very daunting very quickly, and it was his job not only to understand and apply a business case to each, but also he didn't want the use cases to start to be siloed. So he had to start looking at the use cases from an end-to-end process perspective as well. And he was starting to see a huge return on that approach.
See, that's interesting. Actually, I was going to call out before we just assume that we've ended the discussion and gone into questions. Let's pick up some of the points that have already been called out. Two big things that have been referred to in the sort of the chat box. One is around how do we look at these use cases. So Michael, I'm gonna go right back to you. Let's just talk a bit more about the use cases, and then of course the other one is the Chief AI Officer. Both of them, no doubt, are important subjects. So let's go back to business leading the AI conversation. How do you identify use cases? How do you then prioritize them? One of them is identifying the problem statement. Then naturally there is the ROI. What are the other things, and I open up to everyone, what are the other things that should drive encouraging a business to think about problem statements and use cases? All of you, what are the kind of things that could push through this idea of identifying use cases?
Just briefly, I think you do need to go back, and something we've done in SAP, to understand what is the strategy of the organization. What's the even the local strategy in the UK? We have a number of pillars that we adhere to. So when we started looking at use cases that would bring the quickest return of investment to us, it was aligning to those strategies, and then making sure that we weren't just identifying use cases that would help in a siloed manner. We wanted to look at the full end-to-end process so we get even more value out of those projects moving forward.
See, that's interesting. So for an AI use case to be implemented in an effective manner, you can't just break it down into the front office implementation. You have to look at the end-to-end process, right to what that front office process drives in terms of the middle and the back office, to have an end-to-end view and where AI gets in. Mikkel, your view, how do we start looking at use cases and prioritize them?
So I think from SAP perspective, we have working also with our customers with design thinking methodology for a long time, and that is actually so what we have done is we have created a special AI design thinking workshop to help customers identify use cases across the different line of businesses. And it's actually, we have created a couple of variants. So we actually have one for IT and business together in the same room. And we use that also to educate IT how to engage with business as well. So we actually hand over all our materials afterwards. What we have also done, and I like the questions in the beginning, is that we also have a 2-hour workshop where we educate in a design thinking way managers, leaders inside the companies, where we use some gamification, because I think one of the biggest obstacles right now with AI is the culture. Is that managers do not understand, do not trust it. So they do understand, they need to get on board. So that's why we have created different kind of workshops where we actually engage with customers, do not talk about technology, but talk about capabilities. So we have a structured approach to work with our customers on the AI topic.
See, that's interesting. It almost sounds like, picking up Stuart's point on Imagine, it almost feels like business executives proactively now need to go out and have Imagine sessions, wherein you have to be fully aware of the potential of AI, be aware of what are the problem statements you can solve, and then imagine. Clearly, experiencing AI is going to go a long way. So it sounds like IT as the coach is going to be quite an important, significant change in the organization. The other thing apart from use case is this whole idea of the chief AI officer. So thanks for that, Michael and Stuart. It sounds like it's grabbed people's attention. Dan's talked about it, Anna's talked about it. Gabby, you're referring to the regulator, etc., which all sort of feeds into the chief AI agenda. Clearly, the chief AI officer has to be a control function. If you look at the operating model, we have business enabling functions, business operating, facilitating functions, and the control functions. And typically the control functions are the risk, compliance, audit, etc. Now it sounds like while the chief AI officer has to have their presence in the IT capability, to Stuart's point on the history and the learnings from the CDO role, but it is apparent that the chief AI officer has to have a clear understanding of how to manage AI holistically, wherein they drive what the policies for AI and implementation are, create the right kind of drivers and limitations built of regulation, understand the ethics, do the education, do the experimentation, and support in the execution. So it sounds like it's a new area that is sort of emerging. So that's quite interesting. Would you experience, if you look at the chief AI officer, Stuart, do you see it happening anytime soon? Is that an idea that's taking off, or is that still a new organizational change?
No, I think it's on the horizon, right? It's on the near horizon for a couple of reasons, right? I think that there'll be some reticence around appointing chief AI officers because, as you say, there needs to be an element of accountability. And so you need to, from a governance point of view, you need to figure out actually where does the accountability lie? And AI is a particularly complex topic because if you go back to the early days of machine learning, there were actually quite a few examples where organizations were becoming dependent on black box decision making, which was not accountable, right? And as a regulated industry, we can't have decision making where you can't point a finger at something and know how it arrived at the answer it arrived at. So if you then follow that all the way up to the chain to a person that's responsible for everything that happens with everything to do with AI, you start to realize that actually there's a lot of consideration got to be made about how you structure the chief AI officer role, and then what accountabilities it has as part of that. But I think what we are already starting to see is natural evangelists, right? So there are people who are extremely enthusiastic about the, like Al Mikal, within SAP, people who are extremely enthusiastic about the topic and are helping to drive education and to drive change. And so we're starting to see some change, on the near term, but I think it's probably going to take a couple of years to actually work its way out until we start seeing it as an official, role that has longevity.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There is still a time lag that is going to sort of persist, and I can sort of understand that. One of the observations that came through sort of talks about financial services is a data business after all, and for all these years, it has already been using various kinds of data. Will AI really be the differentiator here? And I think certainly from my perspective, AI is now trying to identify insights that a bank did not have. For example, vulnerable customers is becoming quite an important subject, certainly in the UK. How does a bank identify vulnerable customers and ensures that they are treated fairly? For example, to build on that, how do you identify where a customer is being pushed to take financial decisions and let the data then work through saying, look, actually, this is a vulnerable customer. So in terms of financial services and its use of data, now organizations are starting to work out how can that data give them greater insight in terms of customers, vulnerability being one agenda, employee and employee well-being being another agenda, risk and capital positions in getting into the space of simulations and scenario analysis with a whole external macro environment. So clearly financial services is starting to get into it. Another area that is being sort of talked about in the chat room, guys, is around how do we ensure that what are the changes that are happening in the front office and being delivered by the financial services organization. How do you ensure that even when the changes need to be signed off by a human, how should organizations ensure AI implementation does not result in infrastructure vulnerabilities and precarious capital positions? Very interesting, clearly an important subject on implementation. Mikkel, how do we look at AI as a topic wherein infrastructure vulnerabilities are kept in mind as you implement AI solutions? What's your view?
Yeah, I think I would say the standard answer is that we have can say guidelines, we have ethical guidelines. But I think the much more interesting part is that, and we will see that more and more, and I think all companies are using that one, is the monitoring part will also be taken over by AI as it itself. So AI will monitor AI. I'm not sure we can say because who is the most clever one to actually to monitor AI? That is the AI. We see many chatbots now have the capabilities to monitor itself to make sure it's not saying something politically incorrect. And and I say people need to understand that this kind of AI, especially with the Gen AI, it's a revolution.
Very interesting. It is a revolution. AI will AI will monitor AI is a great expression to sort of drive towards. Gentlemen, any closing statements? Michael, Mikkel, Stuart, what do you think should happen next? My sense is it is time to sort of embrace the AI agenda. Any closing statements?
Yeah, I think organizations need to work closely with their vendors who have experience in this place. We have guidelines already. We've been working on this now for quite some time. So an example was the design thinking workshop that a lot of our customers now are starting to leverage. So that is a great opportunity to at least get guidance on where to start.
Excellent. Stuart?
Two things. For the business, it's forget what you think you already know, right? Unblock your imagination. You mentioned there was a comment about financial services as an industry that runs on data. It is, but it runs on too much data, right? Data is duplicated, replicated. We have way too much of it, and we don't actually have a true understanding of all of the data. So get a grip of your data.
Get a grip of your data. Excellent. Mikkel?
Yes, I think Stuart, Michael mentioned about the chief AI officer. I think for that accountability, you also need to have an AI strategy. So that's one thing. The second part is that, and I truly believe it's a revolution. So you cannot wait years. Companies, customers cannot wait years. It's months, and I see that in SAP itself. We don't only do this because it's a business opportunity. It's also about staying in the market as well, surviving in the market.
Excellent. It's getting to time. Let me quickly close. Let me just summarize some of the key points that have been talked about. Business executives now do not need to wait for someone in technology to come knocking at the door saying, let's implement AI. They have to ask for it. Use case prioritization is going to be fundamental. And that is where the Imagine sessions are going to be quite relevant. IT has to play a coach as we go along. IT cannot sit at the back and wait for requests to come through, or for that matter, define what is possible. IT has to now go out there and be a transparent, friendly coach. Clearly, Chief AI Officer has got the attention of everyone, and I'm committing to go out and developing that thought as we move forward. But it has to be a control function, one that sits above the business silos, so the business P&Ls. So almost imagine that at a group level discussion, wherein they don't get caught out by functional agendas and simple business P&L agendas. Data, therefore, has to be an organizational data, cannot be limited to functional data. Data, like Michael said and Mikhail said, is the gold mine. So in summary, I mean, clearly AI is not the elephant in the room as a subject that can't be discussed. It is also not the elephant in the room where each person can see it from different angles and believe what it is. It has to have a common understanding. You have to embrace it. Last time we finished AI and financial services discussion with let's drive for education, focus on ethics, and execute. I repeat this time with the 3 new E's, which is let's embrace it, let's engage on it, and then experiment to execute. So let's embrace AI, let's engage on the subject of AI, and experiment to execute. I'll close on that one. Thanks for everyone for participating, and fingers crossed we'll be chatting soon on the same subject. Thank you.